can you tell us about your life after St. Andrew when you went to England?
Right, well that was quite an experience because first of all, it was the first time I was going in an aeroplane. And so I was traveling with friends who were planning to go to England for a holiday. And they were friends of the family, so I went along with them. They stopped in New York and stayed with friends, so I got a bit of that, and then we traveled over to England. And I was due to stay in a British Council hostel, which had other students from all over the world that stayed there. And this was a woman's hostel. Well, I arrived in the dead of night and was met at the door by this lady who took me up to my room, and it was freezing cold, even though we were talking about July, end of July. I just felt so cold. And the sheets were cold and everything was cold. And but it was fun. My student life in England was very interesting because that was the first time that I actually met people from students from Barbados, Trinidad, and other Caribbean islands, because there was a place called the West Indian Student Center, which was a kind of meeting place for students, West Indian students in London, and we used to go after school, we'd hang out there and meet with these friends, have something to eat because they had a cafeteria, so we could get some West Indian food.
It was like home again.
And it was like home again. Also, the center had a grand piano, and I was able to practice on the grand piano because I was studying music, so I needed and doing piano. And so it was a time where I could get there like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and have the room that had the piano all to myself to practice until later when
you got to develop your skills.
Absolutely, yes. So that was fun. And at music college, I studied I did voice. Voice was my second subject, so I did singing. And then I did the cello, and I also did organ. So I was able to acquire those skills.
So you're telling me that you're a good singer then?
I'm not anymore, but I mean, I love singing. And I enjoy myself in church, you know, I sing my heart out in church. And occasionally I play for a church service, occasionally, but I don't really enjoy the organ. I don't like the organ particularly, because it's a different technique from the piano. I'm a pianist really. So, but I enjoy my music. And so England was interesting for that. We were meeting other West Indians, but also being exposed to the culture in England, which was totally different. And then I was living after I left the hostel, because you could only stay in the hostel for 1 year. You then had to find somewhere else to live. It's a bit like when you go to the States now, you can only stay in the dormitories at the university for a year, and then usually you have to find somewhere else to live.
Really?
So yes, so I checked out with British Council in those days was the place that helped students to settle in. So you'd call a British Council person and say, I'm looking for some digs, as they called it, where you wanted to stay. And they found me a family who had a room, and they also accommodated music students because they had a piano. Because of course, as a music student, we had to find a house or a family that had a piano. And stayed with this family. The husband was blind, and the wife drove him around to do his job. And what was he? He was a piano tuner. And he would tune the piano only with his feeling with his fingers and his hearing, because you know when you lose one sense, the other senses are. So that was an unbelievable experience for me, seeing this blind man, and he, you know, his wife would tell him, we were watching television, and his wife would tell him exactly what was going on, and you know, and he would, you know, who was moving where, and who was sitting down, and all this sort of thing. Fascinating. Also, while I was at that family, there was a Trinidadian girl who was also studying music, but she was at a higher level than I was. She had been there like 2 years, and I had just come. And her name was June Williams. And I reconnected with her about 2 years ago via Facebook and the internet, and that was, you know, but June and I, that's right, and that's like 50 years down the line or 40 years down the line, we're meeting up. But I mean, London had some interesting, and I enjoyed it. I also met my first husband in England, And he met him at the West Indian Student Center too, where we used to have dances and fetes and things, you know. So we would be, you know, having a great time.
The West Indian Student Center seems to be a very important part in your life.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, they don't have it anymore because after everybody became independent, all these countries became independent, they closed it down, you know. But no, it was great. I mean, a lot of the very important people in Jamaica who then came back as lawyers and doctors and stuff, though they used to go to the West Indian Student Center, so, you know, you kind of had a whole network of people that you got to know. So England was very interesting for me. So I got married and had my first child in England, and then while we were there, we decided that we wanted to migrate. And we decided we wanted to go to Canada. Well, my husband was an electronics engineer, and so he saw some advertisement in the paper looking for people, electronic engineers in Canada. So he applied.
Where they're still looking for new people to come to Canada?
Oh, absolutely, because Canada is underpopulated because it's such a vast country. Well, in those days, we were looking for anybody who was qualified, technical engineers, doctors, whatever. And I remember we went to the interview. He had to bring his wife and his family. And they asked me, so what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a music teacher. They said, oh, you don't have any problem finding students in Canada. Just put an ad in the local paper, and then you will get students. So I said, oh, wonderful. So they paid for everything. The Canadians were very good in relocating us, paid for us to come over, had a job waiting, found us a house to live, and then they took us to the bank and told the bank has to lend us money to buy a car. And so we got a car, and so it was all wonderful. We love Canada. But unfortunately, we didn't stay in Canada very long. We stayed for about 4 years because the winters were just unbelievable. I mean, my son Richard, who is my eldest child, he loved the snow. So, you know, two-year-old, and he looks out and he says, Mommy, can I go to play in the snow? And you have to put him in a snow suit that's waterproof and zip him up and put on the thing and send him out there, and he goes out there and he gets soaking wet with the snow, and then you bring him in. And then when I was pregnant with my second child, I had to go out and, I mean, the snow, your husband is driving in from work, and you said, Lord, you feel so sorry for him, so you would take the snow shovel and you'd go and push a path for the tires to drive in. It was quite something. So life in Canada was fun too.
But coming from Jamaica, how did you survive the winters?
You kind of adjust, you know. You adjust because, I mean, as long as you have on warm clothes and you keep warm, that's the main thing. And when it gets too cold, you just come back inside and warm up. Because one thing with Canada is that all the houses are very well heated with central heating, whereas in England, the central heating hadn't come in. You know, you used to have a little fire in the living room and you'd sit there, you know, and that's why a lot of people get what they call chilblains, where they get, you know, their arteries get swollen and you get all sorts of pains in your legs because, you know, the heating is so bad. You're only heating the front of your body, you know, the back of your body is still cold. But later on, England got its central heating. They've become much more modern in these days. So you can't compare it to in the early 60s when I was there to now. I mean, I go back to England quite often. And I still love London. It's one of my favorite cities.
But what happened after you left Canada?
Well, we decided that we were coming back to Jamaica because children now are getting time now to go to school. And we had encountered a little bit of racism in Canada. You know, we were living in French Canada, and, you know, my son came in one day when he was about 2 or 3 and said, Mommy, why are they calling me chocolat? Now, chocolat is French for chocolate. So they were literally calling him black, and he was concerned. You know, why? So I said, don't worry about that. You call them vanilla. So we realized that, and we had heard some very unusual stories about young black kids being put in streams in the classes where they weren't doing academic subjects. They were doing like social studies, looking at television programs and analyzing the programs and all this stuff, instead of doing maths and sciences to the level at which they should have been doing it. So we were a little bit concerned about the schooling in Canada. And so we made the decision that it was time now to come back to Jamaica. So my husband came out, found a job with IBM, and very good job, and so we relocated. So we were back in Jamaica.
Okay, that sounded quite interesting. Now we're going to switch to the fun segment.
Okay.